NES Godzilla, Chapter 3, Trance and Dementia. Narrated by Plague Pasta. I was still pretty shook up from the last level when I started Trance. Trance's map music did nothing to ease the tension. As for how to describe it, have you ever heard the theme from Videodrome? That's the closest thing I can think of to compare it to. I checked to see who the new monster was, and it was Orga, a monster who didn't make his film debut until 2000, appearing in a game made in 1988. So much for my theories about Titanosaurus and Biollante. There's no way this game was made in 1988. Those guys at Toho may be smart, but I'm sure they couldn't see that far into the future. If they could, they never would have gave Roland Emmerich the rights to make a Godzilla movie. No, this had to be a hack of some kind, which just opened up even more questions. Who made this hack, when, how, and most importantly, why? The why was the question that bothered me most. My immediate assumption was to think Billy did this to pull a joke on me, but that couldn't be right either. Billy didn't know how to make a ROM hack. And if he did, he'd probably just do something simple and stupid, like replacing all the monsters with crudely drawn genitalia. Unless Billy had amazing game editing skills and a serious dark streak to his imagination that he never told me about, he couldn't have made this. Is it even possible to put a hacked ROM into a cartridge? Aside from all that, my eye was drawn to a new icon on the map, a question mark. I was really curious as to what that did. I'm sure you're also curious, so I'll explain the quiz levels. Now, since this was when they start appearing, there was one of these per map from here on, and they always appeared near the start of the map. When you start on a quiz level, you appear on a screen like this. As you can see, there's a question at the top, a yes and no button, and an emoticon in the center. I refer to the emoticon as face. Real creative, I know. And for convenience, I'll refer to face as the one asking the questions. The music for the quiz levels was a track actually from the game. It's the one that plays when you try to use the GH1 Dora cheat and get sent to an unplayable level. Face asks you 12 yes or no questions, and you move your monster to the buttons for your answer. When you answer, the question disappears and Face changes expressions for about 8 seconds. Then he goes back to neutral and a new question comes up. There was no time limit, nor any right or wrong answers. Face has no respect for the player's boundaries and will sometimes ask deeply disturbing and personal questions. For example, do you like hurting people? Have you ever killed or raped anyone? Have you been molested by a family member? Other times he would ask questions that were either mind-numbingly stupid, is the sun hot, is water wet, or just flat out ridiculous, does your dog like the president? And maybe once per quiz, Face would ask you a question about the game. With one exception, Face's expression changes seem to have no effect on the game except for indicating what the game creator thought of your answer. His reactions rarely made any sense, and at first I thought they were randomly generated. The questions never followed any pattern. Face never stayed on the same subject for more than 2 questions. Early on, there were questions that made me think Face was building up to something, only to then ask some stupid garbage. Here are the expressions of Face that I saw while playing. I'll separate them into 2 categories, the expressions I understood and the expressions I didn't. First are the expressions I understood. 1. Neutral. 2. Angry. If you try to attack Face, his expression changes to this, but nothing else happens. 3. Sad. 4. Happy. 5. Sick. 6. Maniacal. 7. Surprised. 8. Love. 9. Annoyed. 10. Confused. 11. Guilty or hurt. And here are the others. 2 of these only appeared once, numbers 1 and 12, and I suspected they might have been in-jokes from the creator. Their respective questions were, "Do you like ice cream?" and "Are you a tough guy?" As for the questions in the first quiz, luckily I had a notepad and pen handy. I have problems remembering things, so I often carry one around to jot things down. And sometimes I doodle in it when I'm bored. So when the first quiz started, I thought I'd record what happened. I'm glad I did. Here are the first series of questions, my answers, and Face's reaction. Quiz 1. Do you like the game? Answer, yes. Reaction, happy. Are you afraid? Answer, yes. Reaction, surprised. Are you over 18? Answer, yes. Reaction, weird face number 5. Do birds have teeth? Answer, no. Reaction, love. Is peanut butter good? No. Reaction, sick. Does the moon rotate? Yes. Reaction, weird face number 11. Have you had a job? Yes. Reaction, confused. Do you like hurting people? No. Reaction, annoyed. Is the sun hot? Yes. Reaction, sad. Do you like dogs? Yes. Reaction, happy. Is the president good? Yes. Reaction, weird face number 3. Does your dog like the president? No. Reaction, angry. Now that I've gone through all of that, it's time for the gameplay. After the quiz level, I tried the new green temple icon first. Wow, maybe this is why the game was so weird. One of the designers was clearly drugged out of his mind. Jokes aside, I was quite impressed by the graphics of this level. As disorienting as they were, but I hate those creepy blank staring statue faces, the music had a hypnotic Indian techno vibe to it. There were 2 enemies in this level, a flying ghost type thing with a trunk, and a bat with a horse skull for a face. They appear at random, but I was lucky to get a screen cap of them both. Then I proceeded to a blue mountain level, except another nice, calm stroll. I took my time walking through, and was completely taken by surprise when this happened. The Not Maguera came speeding towards me and took off quite a bit of health with his tentacle screws. It only took me 2 minutes to kill him without having to worry about a time limit, but the boss monsters never showed up in the scrolling levels in the normal game. I was worried as to what other rules the game might break. After another blue mountain stage, it was time to fight Not Varen, whose replacement was one of the most bizarre things I have seen in the game so far. This strange creature attacks you by kicking and also opening his chest and firing heat-seeking missiles. I still don't get it. The missiles were sometimes a pain to deal with, but I found out you could tail whip them out of the way. Not Varen was probably the easiest of the monster replacements. The same could not be said for Not Hedorah. Apparently the source of the horse bats, Not Hedorah, was the most aggravatingly difficult monster to fight yet, mostly because of his special ability. He could shriek and summon a small swarm of those goddamn horse bat things. I know there's only 2 in this screen cap, but every time he did this, about 10 would arrive. The AI took advantage of the distraction and attacked twice as fast while the horse bats were flying around. Once that annoyance was over with, I went through a green temple level to kill some enemies to restore my health. Interestingly, none of the horse bats showed up after Not Hedorah was killed, and that was when I got an idea. If killing all the monsters makes the red face show up, what would happen if I avoid fighting Orga and go straight to the base? So I gave that a try. The game told me there was no monster there when I tried to start the base level, and immediately afterward the game took control of my Godzilla piece and moved it in front of Orga. My little trick didn't work, so I tried to prepare myself for another chase, but first I had to beat Orga. The fight with Orga confirmed another thing. Whoever created this game hack was clearly a Godzilla fan. Not only because they picked a monster like Orga, but because they actually implemented something that happened in Godzilla 2000 in a very neat way. Orga's primary attacks were a punch and a heat beam from his shoulder cavity. But once you had got him down to half his health, he did something new. He would expand his jaws and try to swallow Godzilla, in the process stealing your health and energy. But in doing so, he gave himself a new weakness. Firing a heat beam into his mouth would take a devastating 4 bars of his life meter. With that weakness revealed, I soon beat Orga, and despite how much I had hoped otherwise, that red face appeared on the map where the base was, and the music stopped. I readied myself as best as I could. I started the level, and seeing that it was basically the same as the first, I didn't waste a millisecond before I started hauling ass. I soon encountered obstacles in the form of the ground tile, suspended in air. Most of them you could jump over or destroy, others you had to crouch under. About 40 seconds into it, I heard the horrible bellowing roar and saw that spider beast following close behind me. Stacks of obstacles barely slowed it down. It would back up and then charge its way through them, smashing them into bits. And when the smaller obstacles got in its way, it would expand his jaws and swallow them whole. I was afraid, but with fast thinking and faster button pressing, I escaped him yet again. I felt really excited, and so I laughed and said, "Not this time, asshole." I decided to take a screen cap to celebrate. But when I said that sentence, just before the level ended, the monster did something that made my blood run cold. It looked at me. That wave of mortal terror overtook me again, and I sure as hell wasn't laughing anymore. I took another screen cap at the next level title, right before I rushed to the bathroom to splash some water on my face, and to take a piss that I nearly failed to contain when that fucking thing looked at me. Dementia. When I got back to the game, I was getting very upset and confused. I thought about the way the monster looked at me. The game couldn't have heard what I said. That's impossible. That's mad. It had to be a random occurrence, but why did it happen precisely at the moment I insulted the monster? Nothing about this game made any sense. The new Godzilla monsters, the weird replacement monsters, out-of-place imagery like the green temples, the quiz levels, the red monster chases, all of it. It just didn't seem to add up in any kind of meaningful way. It was a prank. It wasn't funny in any way I could understand, and they clearly put far too much effort into it. If they were trying to make a genuine sequel with the new Godzilla monsters, then why did they add everything else? Maybe it was some kind of art experiment, some group project made by a bunch of really talented and crazy people, and they lost the cartridge somehow. Or maybe they intended for some random person to find it. It was all just fruitless guessing. As far as I could tell, there was only one way to figure out what the deal was with this game. To play it through to the end. Maybe, just maybe, there would be something in the credits, an explanation by the creators as to why they made this, or it could be something much more cryptic and strange, maybe even something horrifying. Before I got a good look at the Dementia board, I considered replaying Trance to see if the red monster would look at me again, but I decided against it. I wanted to keep moving forward. I was also somewhat worried that backtracking might cause the game to become even more strange. The Dementia board music sounded a lot like the Saturn music, except it was slowed down and played with a piano-sounding instrument. Like most of these new map themes, it had a dangerous, suspenseful feel. While listening to the music, I looked at the Dementia board. There were 4 boss monsters this time: Space Godzilla, Manda, Gigan, and Baragon. I was surprised that there were 2 new Toho monsters this time, but the best surprise was still to come. I started the quiz level. Here's another list of results in the same format as the last one. Can you swim? Yes. Happy. Do you like fish? Yes. Reaction, sick. Can penguins fly? No. Reaction, sad. Can it spin in all directions? There was no clarification of what face meant by it, so I just guessed. No. Reaction, surprised. Do you breathe oxygen? Yes. Weird face number 8. Does it taste good when you bite a woman? I don't know who came up with this question, but I really hope they're getting mental help. No? Reaction, annoyed. Is it night where you are? Yes. Reaction, weird face number 6. Do you like cats? Yes. Reaction, confused. Is water wet? Yes. Reaction, angry. Have you ever broken a bone? No. Reaction, happy. Do you like your job? Yes. Reaction, hurt. Would you like a new monster? Yes. Reaction, weird face, number 11. I wasn't entirely sure at the time what face meant by new monster, but I couldn't resist answering yes just to see what would happen. The result was mind-blowing. The game took me back to the board, and I had a new playable monster in the form of Anguirus. Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to play as Anguirus, since he was my second favorite Godzilla monster, and plus I never liked Mothra all that much. I moved my new Anguirus piece over to the level right next to it, eager to test out my new monster. Before I get into the level description, I'll talk about Anguirus a bit. Using the up and down buttons, you could choose whether he stood in a bipedal stance or crawled around on all fours. It wasn't a huge difference, but being able to stand was helpful in boss fights, and crawling sometimes helped dodge obstacles and attacks. He could punch and kick like Godzilla, but no tail whip. Instead, he had something far more interesting, the ability to curl up into a spiked ball of death and roll around. You could still take damage, but it was lessened. It was a good way of clearing out stage enemies, but unfortunately doing this also drained the power bar. But the spiked ball wasn't his only special ability. When you pressed start, he would fire a beam of energy from his mouth. It resembled Titanosaurus' sonar attack, and if this were a hack, it may have been inspired by the roar attack from Atari's Godzilla fighting games. Also of note is that when playing as Anguirus, the level meter gets glitched up. Judging by the life and power bar, I'd say he's on level 10. Now, onto the level. As you might have guessed from the level icon, these levels are a green palette swap of the ground and background tiles from the Blue Mountains. But what immediately caught my attention was the water, which has a transparency effect. Was that even possible for an NES game? I know the Super Nintendo could do it, but I had never seen a transparency effect in a game on the NES. The Green Mountains music was played with the same instrument as the Blue Mountains, but the melody was totally different. It was a very simple song with a lot of abrupt pauses, followed by a loud note every few seconds. Anyway, I went through the usual strolling through the level, and again there were no monsters or anything. But pretty soon I had reached a cliff above the water. There was nowhere to go but into the water, so down I went. The water transparency made things a bit harder to see, but it's tolerable. After going underwater, I encountered 2 new enemies, a giant piranha and some kind of spiky bottom feeder thing. I liked the piranha because I could easily tell what it was. It was a sane enemy design that would appear in a real game, and there were very few enemies like this. They didn't take much hits to kill, but they were quite annoying and could considerably trim down your life if they got close enough. They also tend to travel in packs. As for the bottom feeders, they're easy to deal with. They swim along the bottom of the screen towards you and are easily crushed with their roll attack or jumped over. In this screen cap, you can see me about to run one of them over, and there's a pack of piranha behind it. After I beat that level, I moved Godzilla onto the blue castle icon. I started the level and I got a title screen with the text, Unforgiving Cold. The level itself looked like a castle dungeon made of blue bricks, with rows of identical white statue faces on the walls. These statue faces had a permanent look of horror. There was also some flickering gray static, which didn't really obscure my vision, but it adds to the very unsettling mood of these levels. The music was a 12-second loop of a low-pitched choir vocalizing that sounded very familiar to me. Whenever I played through one of these levels, I got this sudden, horrible feeling of anxiety. I had the feeling that the farther I progressed through the level, the closer I was getting to something unspeakably evil. There weren't any enemies, but these were some of the longest levels in the game. I only played one level, but it took 7 minutes to complete. I didn't want to admit it to myself at the time, but I realized something playing in the Blue Castle level. This game has the power to make the player feel certain things. I didn't mean in the sense that you get irritated playing a crappy game or get unnerved by something scary in a game. What I mean is that certain events in this game can instantly make you start feeling something. I know that sounds completely insane. I don't blame you for not believing me. I wouldn't believe any of this either if I didn't play the game myself. But there's something very, very wrong with this game, and I still don't know how to explain it. So, then it was time to fight Baragon's replacement. Although Baragon was originally the smallest monster in the game, his replacement was the largest. It was so tall, in fact, that the ground was noticeably lowered. And not Baragon's head still barely avoided collision with the bar at the top of the screen, and he was just as frighteningly bizarre as he was huge. You may be wondering how he attacks without arms. Well, he has the most powerful kick in the game, but his other fighting technique is much stranger. First, he blasts a cloudy breath of pixels down at you, which causes you to freeze. Then he walks back to the right corner of the screen and extends a huge Gatling gun from his abdomen. That might seem amusing to you, but it certainly wasn't to me when I was playing the game. This attack is almost as annoying as Gigan's Saw, and not Baragon could have been unbeatable if he consistently used it. Thankfully, he only did it twice while fighting him. Once you unfreeze, you can run up and start damaging the gun, which does extra damage to him. This helped me to destroy him, and then it was time to play the third level type. I decided that I was going to use Inglorious to fight Manda and Gigan, and then fight Space Godzilla as Godzilla. It was only fitting. Before getting into the battles, I'll describe the third level type, the Arctic. The Arctic is exactly what you'd guess from the name, an icy tundra with a few watery segments. The music reminded me a bit of Northern Hemispheres from Donkey Kong Country in 8-bit form, a very dangerous sounding song. It made me think about being trapped in a tundra and just freezing to death. There were 2 new enemies in this stage. The first was a creature frozen in a block of ice. They block your way and you have to use the heat beam to thaw them out. They look a bit like a smaller version of Not Gazora, only without the eye. When freed, they do a strange crawling movement and push you backwards. It doesn't cause any damage, but it's a bit annoying. After dealing with the Iceman, I kept walking for a minute or two and came upon a water segment. I jumped in, and this time I managed to get a screen cap showing how the water splashes when you jump in. Don't know how they program that, but it's pretty damn impressive. Another interesting thing is how the screen changes focus when you go underwater. Here you can see the other new enemy, a little thing I call Spike Walker. They walk towards you and they explode randomly or instantly if you attack them, sending spikes in every direction. The spikes don't do much damage, but they did get me dangerously close to falling into a pit a few times. Oh, speaking of the pits, down into the water, the game has a platformer element, bottomless pits. There weren't any of these in the original game since it was strictly an action game, but the pits were a neat addition. After getting back on land, I encountered a very unexpected mini-boss, Maguma, the walrus kaiju. I know this game had some obscure monsters to begin with, but wow. Not that I'm complaining, it's a pretty cool cameo for an unappreciated kaiju. Maguma's fighting tactics were very simple. He had a freeze beam, and he could charge into you. Not very challenging, but certainly more entertaining than the Matango mini-boss in the original game. One really interesting thing about Maguma is that he doesn't die when you defeat him. He turns tail and retreats. This was the first time I had ever seen an enemy monster change direction, let alone retreat. I tried to chase after him, but he disappeared after I got in the water. Poor bastard. And that does it for the Arctic. I'll talk about the Manda fight next. I forgot to mention before, but the music that played during the new monster fights is reused from themes actually in the games. So far, the themes have been Titanosaurus, Gazora's music, Biolante, Hedora's music, Orga, Baragon/Maguire's music, Manda, Varen's music, Space Godzilla, Mechagodzilla's music. As for the fight, Manda was a fairly crafty opponent. When it realized one tactic was ineffective, it would immediately change to a different one. Manda used quite a few tricks, like spitting fire, biting, and the most irritating of all, constricting. It doesn't mercilessly drain your life down the Gigan's cutter, but it was by far Manda's strongest attack. One last thing to note that I found pretty cool was that Atragon showed up during the fight to help me out. Manda crushed it with ease, but it was still cool. After I slayed Manda, I played through the Arctic level for health power-ups, and then it was on to Gigan's replacement. When the fight started, I was very confused because there was nothing there. I thought this was going to be like the Titanosaurus fight in Pathos, but just about the time it would have been going back to the map, a piranha appeared on screen. But it wasn't there for long. As soon as it appeared, the speakers emitted an ear-splitting screech, and Not Gigan flew in and ripped the poor fish into pieces. Well, that's one way to get the player on their toes. That abrupt entrance scared the hell out of me and got my adrenaline rushing, which in retrospect was a good thing because Not Gigan was one of the fastest, most unrelenting opponents in the game. Not Gigan was tough, but my new skills with Anguirus helped to even the score. This was still an incredibly intense fight. Not Gigan's attacks consisted of some kind of blood laser he spews from his mouth and a downward slash. I was expecting some hellish variant of the buzzsaw attack, but thankfully there didn't seem to be one. The Howl attack was invaluable in defeating him. I would have taken more screen caps of the fight, but I really had to concentrate. After that, there was just one monster left to take down. Space Godzilla. As mentioned earlier, I used Godzilla for this fight. Space Godzilla's fighting technique was rather frustrating, but admittedly a very clever idea. Space Godzilla would use his energy to create two flying crystals which would reach the ground and become crystal spires. These spires not only block you from reaching Space Godzilla, but it also allowed him to constantly recharge to full energy and blast you with a deadly full-charged Corona beam until you broke the spires. Space Godzilla would eventually drain his own spires of energy until they shattered, but if you waited for that to happen, you'd probably lose a lot of life. Heat beams actually seemed to re-energize the spires, so you had to use physical attacks. When you finally got close enough to hit Space Godzilla, he was no pushover. When I punched him, he hit me back just as hard. Space Godzilla does everything in his power to knock you back to the left corner of the screen, so he can recreate more spires. By the time this was over, I only had about 5 life bars left, but it didn't matter. Because I didn't need to fight anymore. I needed to run. Here we go again. I decided right then that I really wanted to see the end of this game. As terrifying as these levels could be sometimes, I had to beat them to get through. I decided that no matter what happened, no matter what the game showed me, I was going to get to the end, and I also made sure not to say a damned word while playing a chase level from here on. For this level, I tried out Anguirus, since his roll attack allowed me to move faster than Godzilla or Mothra. The chase started off like the first two, except there was a river of blood flowing beneath the ground. I was beginning to get the hang of it, and the extra speed from the roll helped me get an edge on the red monster, especially since I didn't have to worry about a power limit and could keep rolling endlessly. Like the previous levels of water, the ground inevitably reached a stop, so I rolled off into the blood. To my surprise, the hell beast didn't follow after me. It just stopped at the edge of the ground and grimaced. I guess it can't swim, I thought to myself, so I went under blood and continued moving. There wasn't anything around, but I knew something was up. The chase wasn't going to end that easily, could it? Surely something else had to show up. And sure enough, I heard the bellowing roar, sounding slightly different. And the monster was following after me in a new aquatic body. I had no idea it was a shapeshifter. After it reappeared, the chase started to get into the difficulty I had expected. Being submerged slowed me down, putting me and the beast at about the same speed. The only thing that would keep me alive was fast thinking and reflexes. I encountered some bottomless pits in which mines floated up from. I assumed that if you hit one, it would damage you and knock you back, considering how fast the red monster swims. Hitting the mines would be instant death. So I went through great effort to avoid them. But that wasn't all I had to be wary of. Halfway through the chase, the hell beast revealed yet another surprise. A tentacle formed of intestines and tipped with a clawed set of jaws burst from its mouth, trying to pull me in and devour me. I only barely avoided both the tentacle and the mines, but I could tell the beast was getting desperate because the chase was nearly over. And about a minute later, I had spotted a bit of ground that served as the exit. I leaped with all the might I could muster without breaking my controller. The beast screamed with rage and jumped out of the blood river in one last attempt to drag me down, but I escaped its grasp. This time. I fell back on my bed and took a deep breath, satisfied with yet another successful escape. Now I was headed to the fifth world. Entropy.